very good evening to you, and many thanks for joining us on The Big Story, where it is the last day of the month in which President Uhuru Kenyatta officially got the mandate to govern Kenya for the second and the last time. Tonight, we'll look at Jubilee administration's priorities with regard to international integration versus national cohesion. Some critics claim that President Uhuru, in his inauguration speech, was keen on laying down a specific action plan towards enhancing regional harmony at the expense of national unity. So we ask, who comes first, nation or neighbor? All right, so we shall be discussing the matters of regional integration, and later on I shall be having that discussion with the panelists, including Peter Mathuki, who is an outgoing member of the IALA, and Shem Ochuodo, who's the chairman of the Kenya Diaspora Alliance, as well as John Gashie, who is a regional affairs expert. And in Runda, our lead reporter, Sophia Wanuna, will be speaking to the Cabinet Secretary in charge of Foreign Affairs, Ambassador Amina Mohammed, who is on standby right now. So let's join our reporter, Sophia Wanuna. Good evening to you.
Good evening, Sharon. So integration, regional integration, clearly a priority for President Uhuru Kenyatta as he begins his second term. We heard in his inauguration speech talking about that open door policy, in essence, in the region and across the continent, a significant announcement and declaration that he made that has received a lot of coverage throughout the continent and indeed even the world. Will this change the game or the landscape in as far as politics and engagement and internationally? We'll wait to see. But however, we'll also remember there have been several issues in the East African community in the recent past, several tensions, whether it's with Tanzania, Uganda, and other of our neighbors on various fronts. But joining me this evening to talk a little bit more, beginning with what we witnessed at the inauguration, as you mentioned, Sharon, is a cabinet secretary in charge of foreign affairs, cabinet secretary Ambassador Amina Mohammed. Thank you so much for making time for the big story.
Thank you.
So we had 13 heads of state and government attend the inauguration ceremony and other heads of delegations. Was it what you expected in as far as the port in this second term, starting it off?
Absolutely, absolutely. If we didn't have the EU-AU summit that was taking place exactly at the same time in Cote d'Ivoire, then we would have had many more heads of state and government. I think it just speaks to the stature of our president, the stature of our country, and it underlines where the continent sees Kenya and Kenya's place to be. And so we're lucky. We're very, very lucky that we're beginning His Excellency's second term on such a high note. And from his speech, you can tell that we're poised for the next phase of our development.
Yeah.
In many areas, you talk to the visa regime, the new visa regime, and yes, we were extremely delighted to hear about that, because again that His Excellency the President has always put Africa as a cornerstone of his foreign policy, and therefore it's important that even as we move into this next phase, that we open up the continent, not just Kenya. I think you'll see this as a beginning of a process of the opening up of the continent to trade, to investment, to the movement of people, of goods, and to encouraging others to also do the same. We have to see our continent as the continent of promise, right? Especially for our young people, right? Who are very innovative, creative, and who do not want to be caged and put in a small space. They want to be able to exploit, right, and explore the extent of the possibilities and opportunities that lie within this continent of ours.
Yeah.
And so, the whole speech was received really, really well, whether it was in terms of just the place, that the president has placed manufacturing, universal, healthcare, the issue of the cottage industry and the growth of SMEs, the issue of industrialization of the country, in energy, So everything that he spoke to actually spoke to the priorities of the continent, and to a certain extent beyond the continent.
Yeah.
So very, very well received. And of course, we're all very, very excited about this next phase of Kenya's development.
Right. And talking about just that open door policy and saying, East African community, they'll be treated with the same, in the same fashion as Kenyans. The rules, whether it's accepting them in here for employment and otherwise. And of course, just other countries around the continent being able to come in terms of getting visa at the entry point. Many say a lot of that sounds like political rhetoric. In terms of implementation, is there a difficulty? Have we seen challenges even with the East African community so far with just the ID being used to get in?
Well, there'll always be challenges when you're implementing, right? A new policy. And it's the business of government and of those that are implementing this policy to address them and actually turn those challenges into opportunities. It's time. It's time to do this. As one goes around the continent, one actually realizes that the potential of this wonderful continent of ours will never be truly, fully unleashed until we allow the free movement of people. But what that will also do is that it's going to trigger, right, investment in infrastructure, right? Whether it's road, rail, whether it is shipping lines, being developed, whether it's air traffic. You'll see much more investment in that because people will want to travel, and they'll want to travel, and not expensively but cheaply, right? So you need to make it as cost effective as possible for them to be able to travel. But it's the one big thing that everybody was waiting for, right? And Kenya has led. It has led in many, many areas. And I really am very, very grateful to the president that he took this step, because this was the next big step for us to take.
What about the critics, yes, who say Kenya is overextending herself? She's being over generous with neighbors that have turned their back on Kenya in the recent past. Say Uganda on the transport and the oil pipeline you mentioned, your candidature for the AUC, and that some of the countries that did not support that we expected to. Is Kenya overly being good to her neighbors, and she's not receiving the same kind of treatment?
I think that for as long as we know that every election will have one winner, right, then we are safe. Okay, there can't be two winners in an election. And so we stood for the AUC, and we did it for very, very good reason. And it didn't happen. Somebody else was elected, a wonderful, wonderful African who's doing amazing things for the continent, and we're extremely delighted with that. In terms of the ESC, the ESC is here to stay. It's here to stay. And again, I was asked this question a while back, and I said, well, isn't it better to have 10 roads than one road? And so we actually have a deficit, infrastructure deficit. And so we should not be complaining about getting too much infrastructure. I think we should just roll with it. We have a very young population that is growing and that demands that our infrastructure also grows with them. In terms of everything else, we're neighbors. We will always be neighbors, And so, yes, we'll have hiccups along the way. And it's our ability to actually deal with those hiccups that will determine how fast we are able to grow and develop. And so I think we need to just sharpen our toolbox, make sure that we have the necessary tools to address any hiccups that will arise along the way. But our neighbors are our neighbors, and we're all members of the East African community, and we've done amazing things together. Through the North Corridor initiative, that we're able to travel much easier. We're able to establish domestic tariffs and, do a lot of amazing things. We're able to facilitate trade. We're able to facilitate the movement of goods from the port of Mombasa to the hinterland and beyond. So when we come together, right, and when there is adequate political will, we can move mountains.
To the critics, as we bring this to a close, CS, who say there's a lot of emphasis on international engagement and regional engagement. And some will look at it as, what about those Kenyans? I'm sure you've received this question many a times, and it's an issue you've seen even on social media. Kenyans who've either been detained, imprisoned, have come back in body bags, and the kind of action and engagement we see from the country getting these people back. So as opposed to, yes, we're inviting all these people, but when one Kenyan is in trouble, people wonder, isn't this integration first to come in priority when Kenya is looking out for her people when they're in trouble outside?
Well, we do. And the track
yeah.
record of President Kenyatta is so clear,
yeah.
you know. From 2013 to date, right? Just look at the number of Kenyans we've been able to bring back, right? Just in terms of crises in other countries. When we had problems in Libya, we brought our compatriots back home. When there were problems in Egypt, we did the same thing. When there were, some challenges in South Sudan, we did exactly the same thing. In Yemen, we did the same thing. The other day, in Asia, there was a problem. We brought them back, right? And whenever any of our compatriots goes out to search for greener pastures, look for jobs, and a misfortune befalls them, we also do the same. We help in getting them back home. So we try and do the best that we can, right? But the issue of law and order as well is not an issue that is limited to our country. Yeah? So we need to look at the wider world. And whenever we look at figures, I think we have to compare them to other countries of the same size, and to see how much they're doing for their compatriots. And you'll see that we are miles ahead of them. We're not perfect, and we still need to improve the way that we deal with these issues. Yeah. And yes, at times we have, probably not done as much as we should have, right? But again, everything is a learning process, right? So you have to go through that curve. But I can tell you that when our history is written, right, from the time His Excellency came into office in 2013 to date, we have done much more for Kenyans that are living elsewhere. Yeah. Whenever we need to support them than any other government has ever done. One, two, we have even written a policy for our diasporians. So we actually have a living document that addresses the concerns, the aspirations, right, and the hopes of Kenyans who live outside the country. Okay. So we've really done our best. Yeah. Where we've had some shortcomings, we apologize, and we promise, obviously, that we'll continue doing better than we did. But I think that the track record actually speaks for itself.
Yeah, and to expect a clearer roadmap in coming days from the ministry, isn't it? And as far as the foreign policy and integration.
We have our vision written down for us now.
Yes. Thank you. Many thanks. Yes. Amina Mohammed, Ambassador, with us tonight here on The Big Story. Sharon.
Right. Many thanks, Sophia Wanuna there, speaking with the Foreign Affairs Cabinet Secretary, Ambassador Amina Mohammed. Just to remind you, we shall be talking about that regional integration and cohesion matter here in studio tonight. Of course, coming, in the wake of the nominations set to take place of political parties today having fronted their nominees for vetting for membership into the East African Legislative Assembly. And I shall be speaking with Peter Mathuki, who is an outgoing member of IALA, as well as Shem Ochuodho, who is the chairman of the Kenya Diaspora Alliance, and John Gashie, who is the regional affairs expert. Right, so let's just take a listen to one of the soundbites we had earlier from the minority leader in the National Assembly, John Mbadi, regarding the Migingo Island.
Country. The people of Uganda, the Uganda security comes not once, not twice, many times past the boundary of Kenya and Uganda, right inside Kenya, and terrorize, even at times, take money from the fishermen from the Kenyan side.
Why haven't our president ordered the KDF to be in Migingo to defend Migingo as also part of Kenya? I want to refer His Excellency Uhuru Kenyatta to what his father once said when Idi Amin threatened to invade in Kenya, that should Amin do it, then he would have pushed Amin past even Dodoma.
All right, so we want to get into that discussion with my panel tonight. Many thanks for joining me tonight, gentlemen. And we have been seeing in the recent past a really salty relationship between Kenya and her neighbors. We have seen animals, chicks, fish, and cattle coming in between the relationships between these countries. And I want to start with you, Mr. Gashie, just to talk about this seemingly very generous offer by President Uhuru Kenyatta in his speech, coming at a time when there is salty relationships between us. What would you say informed this? And do you think we are being overexcited about this?
Thank you. The first things first is that I think every country's foreign policy is based primarily on self-interest. And in this regard, the President's announcement on new visa regime and a lot of other things are primarily to Kenya's advantage. Now, and I would say that it is an attempt by the President, and I believe the CS was fairly articulate in her position, that Kenya is trying to leverage on her position in the region. And indeed, the more we have people coming into Kenya, and the more we have a more robust engagement with our region and in Africa, Kenya stands to gain. Perhaps let's put a bit of figures into this. Uganda, for example, is our largest trading partner. Indeed, countries in Eastern Africa are some of the, the fastest growing markets for Kenyan produce, for Kenyan export, and also for Kenyan, shall I say, human resource export. Now, in all this, perhaps we needed to be aware that Kenya is copying to a large extent what has been done in Rwanda, and Rwanda has had a lot of benefits by having a fairly liberal, visa regulation, and all sorts of things. And Kenya has a bigger, better position and can take advantage. It is apparent that Kenya needed to leverage on its position within the region in terms of services, in terms of economic development, in terms of access. And also, remember, Kenya is very strategically placed in the region. She must leverage on her advantages in terms of transport corridors, transport routes, and what have you. So, for people perhaps to insinuate or perhaps imply that Kenya is losing out by that statement by the President, I think perhaps is taking it a bit too far. That there are issues that needed to be sorted out within the East African community, within our bilateral relations with Kenya, Uganda, South Sudan, Ethiopia, Somalia, and indeed the larger Africa.
All right. All right. And Mr. Mathuki, even as Mr. Gashie says that Kenya is just trying to strategically place itself and to maximize on the opportunities for trade and what have you, some argue that the so-called dominating position that Kenya has in terms of economy and trade in the region is what really has been causing some sort of sibling rivalry and competition with its neighbors. Would you say that we are at a place where this is healthy competition that is leading to the kind of friction that we are seeing between ourselves and the neighbors? Is it healthy? What would you say?
Yes, I would start by saying that the East African community, right from the beginning, set out 4 key pillars of integration. So therefore, when you are saying that integration is a success, you must look at the 4 pillars. And the first one is the customs union. We have the common market protocol. We have the monetary union and the ultimate political federation. So at the moment now, we are supposed to be implementing the common market protocol. And what I would want to say right from the beginning is that for the last 5 years or so, Kenya has been doing very badly, and I must say this, on matters of EAC regional integration. Why am I saying so? As a member, and I was the chair of the committee that was responsible for good governance, it was called the Legal Committee, we assessed and saw that Kenya only was able to legislate 6 pieces of law that would facilitate the implementation of the common market protocol. While countries like Uganda, for example, did 10 laws, Rwanda did 10 laws, and therefore Tanzania did about 8, Kenya did 6, so Kenya is number 4, of course, fifth being Burundi, and of course, South Sudan. So I would say, obviously, unless something is done very urgently, of course, now the rest of the partner states of the EAC will not be taking Kenya very seriously. Remember, it's a few months ago when the tourist vans from Tanzania were barred from taking tourists from the airport. And therefore, some of those things caused a lot of mistrust and that kind of thing. And therefore, going forward, and I think that's why we need to take it very seriously, the EAC regional agenda, because that is the future. And that to be done, it will require political goodwill. And political goodwill needs to be demonstrated by the heads of summit, and the heads of summit in this particular case is the heads of states in the 5 partner states. Of course, I heard Ambassador Amina being very mean. Of course, she has to be a bit diplomatic. But the statement that was made at the Kasarani on saying that we allow all the East Africans, of course, to come into Kenya like any other Kenyan, it's a good political statement. But now for it to be practical, we need a legal framework. We need to put legislation that will facilitate that movement of people across border. Those are some of the practical issues that needs to be done going forward, and we must not take regional integration as politics. We must make it practical because that is the future. Imagine now we are looking at it strategically as Kenya because it is in our strategic interest to make sure that it's a success because it's a good market for our goods that we produce here. It is a good place where our people can also get jobs. It is a place that we need to see how, at the end of the day, we have a broader market where obviously we could sell our goods. So what I'm saying is that the regional integration, it is a real issue. It is a strategic matter that needs to be played above politics. Of course, that was a good starting point. But remember, about a week ago, when President Magufuli went to Uganda, and they tried to open Mutukula border, that is opening the border between Tanzania and Uganda. That is to say now they are trying to get an alternative route of goods apart from now the one they use through Kenya. And this is to say, indeed, our neighbor seems to be now developing some sort of cold feet, to say, so to say, and therefore we need to have the game. And to have the game is that Kenya must indeed play the big brother in true meaning of that word. Remember about 2 years ago, I remember the annual subscriptions that countries make to the EAC, Kenya paid for Burundi. And that was to show the goodwill that, of course, Kenya was perceived to be. Now, that goodwill seems to be going down. So, really, we need to really up our game.
Right.
Yeah, I think that is where we are.
Right, and Mr. Mathuki, just to stay with you for a bit, because we've seen some actions that really some Kenyans have reacted to or described as being hostile from the Tanzanian President, John Magufuli. We saw him burning alive chicks, one-day-old chicks, up to 6,000 of them in Tanzania, and also the auctioning of over 1,000 cattle, saying that Tanzania is not a free grazing ground. How should Kenyans really react to this, and how does it impact on trade relations and also just diplomatic relations between the two countries?
That was, of course, was very unfortunate, but we must appreciate that there's a framework to do business among or between the partner states. We have said we have what we call the customs union. We have the common market protocol, where there is very clearly on how we are supposed to be relating. But therefore, when we, of course, as Kenyans, and I think this is very important in terms of sensitizing our business people and our citizens in terms of how we are supposed to deal, that if you wake up one day, for example, and you want to carry your goods without clearance and you take them to Tanzania or Uganda or any other country, without following the criteria, of course, you are likely to face such a kind of a situation. But I think what is the biggest problem here is that for the last 5 years, remember in other countries and the MOU that existed in the partner states of EAC, that each partner state was to have a standalone ministry in charge of East African community.
All right.
In Kenya, the Ministry of EAC has become a mere department under the Ministry of Labor, which is very unfortunate. If there was a standalone ministry, somebody in charge of this, some of these things would become very easy because you'll be able now to, of course, enhance the talks, of course, try to relate and discuss with your colleagues in the partner states on how you are supposed to be doing this. But without a standalone or responsible minister in charge of EAC, these are some of the difficulties. There's nobody actually now who would say a minister for EAC. The minister of EAC in Uganda is a whole prime minister in Uganda. So you can see how other partner states are giving EAC prominence. And therefore, Kenya, we need to do better than we are doing.
All right. Many thanks. And when we come back, we want to go for a short break now, but when we come back, we shall be picking the mind of Shemo Chodho, who is the chairman of the Kenya Diaspora Alliance, just to understand what is the reaction of the diaspora and thoughts of the diaspora with regards to this latest development. So we shall be coming back with that. But first, we want to take a short break here on The Big Story. Don't go too far.